Derek pulled up to the address at 1:52 a.m. The GPS said he had arrived. There was nothing there. No house. No driveway. No mailbox. Just a long stretch of farm road outside Lubbock, Texas. Flat black fields on both sides. His headlights cutting two pale cones into nothing. He checked the app again. 4471. County Road 17. Pickup confirmed. Passenger waiting. He looked through his windshield at the empty dark. Then his phone buzzed. A new message from the passenger. It said, "I'm right here." Derek looked up from the phone. A woman was standing 20 feet in front of his car. She had not been there a second ago. He would swear to that for the rest of his life. That stretch of road had been empty when he looked down at his phone. And when he looked up, she was simply standing there, in the wash of his headlights, wearing a thin yellow dress that didn't belong to October weather, her arms hanging straight at her sides. She did not wave. She did not move toward the car. She just stood there, looking at him, while his headlights lit her up against nothing but flat dark fields in every direction. Welcome to Haunted Stories. Derek Mullins was 26 years old, driving nights for a rideshare app to cover rent while he finished an associate's degree at South Plains College. He'd been doing it for 14 months. He knew the routes around Lubbock well enough to predict traffic patterns, knew which gas stations had clean bathrooms, knew the specific exhaustion that builds in your eyes after the fourth straight overnight shift. He did not know that Tuesday night in October that he was about to take the last fare of his life behind that wheel. Not because anything happened to him, but because he would never get back in a car alone at night again. He told me this story 2 years later, sitting across from me at a diner in the middle of the afternoon, daylight pouring through the windows, and his hands were still shaking when he got to the part about the dress. It had been a slow night. Derek had picked up 6 fares since 9 p.m., a few bar runs, a hospital shift worker, a couple fighting in his back seat the whole way to their apartment. Ordinary Tuesday work. He'd been planning to log off after his current trip, a drop-off downtown, head home. Then the app pinged with one more request. 4471. County Road 17. $34 fare. Surge pricing. Pickup requested for 1:50 a.m. He almost declined it. The address was 20 minutes outside town, in a stretch of farmland he didn't usually drive through this late. And the fare wasn't worth the detour on a night when he was already running on fumes. But $34 was $34. Rent was due in 4 days. He accepted the ride before he'd really thought it through. The GPS took him off the main highway, onto a county road that got narrower and darker with every mile. No street lights. No other cars. Just the white line down the center. And his headlights. And the radio playing low. He passed 2 actual houses in 15 minutes of driving. Porch lights on. Normal homes. Normal mailboxes with normal numbers. Then the houses stopped. And it was just fields. Flat and black under a sky with no moon. The GPS said he had 4 minutes left. He told me that around the 3-minute mark, something in his chest started to feel wrong. Not fear exactly. More like a low hum of unease he couldn't place. The kind of feeling you get when something is slightly off in a room and you can't identify what. He almost called the passenger to confirm the address. He didn't, because the GPS pinged its arrival chime. And he looked up. And there was the empty road. And then there was the woman in the yellow dress. And the unease in his chest became something with a different name entirely. He sat frozen for a moment, hands still on the wheel, looking at her through the windshield. She didn't move. She didn't wave. She just looked at him with an expression he later struggled to describe. Not threatening. Not pleading. Just patient. The way you wait for someone who's running a little late. His phone buzzed again. Another message in the app chat. It said, "Can you unlock the door, please?" He looked at the message. He looked back up. She was at his back passenger door now. He had not seen her walk there. One moment she'd been 20 feet ahead of his bumper. The next she was at the door handle. Trying it. Finding it locked. Looking at him through the rear window. With that same patient expression. Every instinct in Derek's body told him to drive away. But he'd been doing this job for 14 months. And somewhere in that time he'd absorbed a kind of professional muscle memory. Passenger requests the door. You unlock the door. You don't leave someone stranded on a dark road. He told me later that this instinct, the one that had kept him polite and reliable for over a year of work, was the thing that almost got him into real trouble that night. He unlocked the door. She got in. She said her name was Carrie. She said it quietly, almost shy, settling into the back seat with her hands folded in her lap. Derek checked the app. The passenger name listed matched. Carrie M. 5-star rating. Account created 11 months ago. He pulled back onto the county road, heading toward the destination she'd input. An address in town. A residential street he recognized. For the first few minutes, it was an ordinary ride. She didn't talk much. He glanced at her once in the rearview mirror. She was looking out the window at the dark fields passing by, her reflection pale against the glass. Then he noticed she wasn't wearing a seatbelt. He mentioned it, the way drivers do out of habit and liability concern. She looked at him in the mirror. She said very softly, I don't need it. He laughed it off. The kind of nervous laugh you give when something's a little strange and you want to move past it. He turned the radio up slightly. 3 minutes into the drive, the temperature in the car dropped. Not gradually. Sharply. Like someone had cracked every window at once. Except all the windows were closed. And the heater was running. Derek's breath started fogging in front of his face. He glanced at the dashboard temperature display. 71 degrees. Same as it had read the entire shift. He looked in the rearview mirror. Carrie was looking directly at him now. No longer watching the window. And her expression had changed. Not threatening exactly, but intent. Focused on him in a way that made the hair on his arms stand up. She said, You smell like cigarettes. Derek didn't smoke. He told her that. His voice a little tight. She said, My husband smoked cigarettes. He smelled just like you do right now. Derek kept driving. He told himself it was a strange comment. An odd passenger. Nothing more. The kind of thing you laugh about with other drivers later. The weird fares you pick up on overnight shifts. He did not feel like laughing. She started talking unprompted, in a low even voice that filled the car the way the cold had. She talked about a house on a farm road. About a husband who worked nights at a feed mill. And came home smelling like smoke and motor oil. About waiting up for him. Every night. Sitting by the window. Watching the headlights of his truck come down the long gravel drive. She talked about one night when the headlights never came. She talked about waiting longer. About walking out to the road herself. In her yellow dress. Because she couldn't stand sitting in that house alone any longer. Needing to see for herself if he was on his way. She said, I just wanted to see him coming. She said, I waited a long time on that road. Derek's hands were sweating on the wheel. He glanced at the GPS. They were 11 minutes from the drop-off address. And every one of those minutes felt longer than it should. He said, trying to keep his voice steady. That's AS. Ad story? She looked at him in the mirror. She said, It's not a story. Derek did not respond. He pressed the gas pedal slightly harder. She said, Do you know what happens to someone who waits on a dark road long enough? He said nothing. She said, You start waiting for everyone. Not just him. Anyone with headlights. Anyone who might be the one finally coming home. The GPS pinged again. Destination in 3 minutes. Derek had never been so relieved to see a countdown timer in his life. He turned onto the residential street the app indicated. Rows of small houses with porch lights. Normal mailboxes. Normal life going on behind dark windows while their occupants slept. The ordinariness of it felt like oxygen after holding his breath for 10 minutes. The GPS pin landed on a house halfway down the block. Derek pulled up to the curb. He turned around to tell her they'd arrived. The back seat was empty. Not empty the way it is when someone quietly opens a door and steps out. He would have heard that. Felt the dome light flick on. Felt the weight shift in his suspension as she got out. The seat was simply empty. The seatbelt still coiled in its housing. No sign anyone had ever sat there at all. Derek sat completely still for a long moment. Then he looked down at his phone. The trip was marked complete. Fare charged. 5 stars. Automatically rated. The way the system does when a ride finishes normally. A small notification at the bottom of the screen read, "Thanks for the ride." He looked up at the house the GPS had pinned. Porch light off. Driveway empty. No car. The kind of house that looked like nobody currently lived there. Overgrown grass. A real estate sign half buried near the mailbox. For sale in faded letters. He did not get out to check the address. He drove straight home. Hands shaking on the wheel the entire way. And he did not sleep that night. And he canceled his rideshare account 3 days later. And has not driven for hire since. Here is what Derek found 2 weeks afterward. When curiosity finally outweighed his fear enough to search the address from the original pickup. 4471. County Road 17 had been the site of a farmhouse that burned down in 1994. A woman named Carrie Holt had lived there with her husband, a man who worked nights at a local feed mill. The newspaper article Derek found said her husband had died in a truck accident on County Road 17, less than half a mile from their house, on a foggy October night. He never made it home. Carrie Holt was found 3 weeks later, on the same stretch of road, having walked out from the house in the middle of the night during a cold front. The coroner's report listed exposure as the cause of death. She had been found wearing a thin yellow dress. No coat. Standing distance from the spot where her husband's truck had gone off the road. She had died, the article said, waiting for headlights that were never going to come again. Derek read that article sitting in his car outside the diner where he'd later tell me this story. And he told me he sat there for almost an hour afterward. Not moving. Just thinking about her voice in his back seat. Asking him if he knew what happens to someone who waits on a dark road long enough. He thinks about the drop-off address sometimes too. The empty house. The for sale sign. The fact that the GPS had sent him somewhere current and ordinary. Somewhere with porch lights and mailboxes. As if whatever picked him up that night needed, just for a little while, to go somewhere that still looked like a life being lived. He told me the last thing. The thing he still can't fully explain. He said when he canceled his account, he had to enter a reason from a drop-down menu. He scrolled through the options. Found new job. Moving away. Schedule conflict. He selected other. And the app asked him to type a brief explanation if he wanted to. He didn't type anything. But 3 days later, checking his email out of habit, he found a confirmation message from the rideshare company, thanking him for his feedback. Attached was a copy of what he had supposedly submitted. In the text box, where he remembered leaving nothing, 4 words were typed. It said, "I needed a ride. This has been Haunted Stories. Subscribe if you dare."